procurement of goods, works, and services. I believe that is the unit you're supposed to take.
Yes,
You're in level 1.
it is level 1 on the CPSPK.
The CPSPK level 1, or works. So this unit, in simple terms, tries to bring into light what happens on a day-to-day basis when it comes to operations in the field of supply chain management. And it is very broad, and you are going to talk about many aspects that shape the supply chain. Remember, when we talk about supply chain, we are looking at supply chain as an umbrella. Within supply chain, we have different components. Today, you can get yourself in logistics. You might get yourself in warehousing. You can get yourself in procurement. You can get yourself in imports and exports, international purchasing. All that form part and parcel of supply chain management. So supply chain is all about trying to ensure that you move products and information from the manufacturer or from the supplier up to the time the product reaches the customer. So in between, we have different activities that support this and leads to success in some of these processes. So at the end of this unit, we shall look at the following. We shall look at introduction to procurement of goods, services, and works. So you shall be in a position to understand what happens, what are goods, what are services, what are works, and some of the features of goods, works, and services. Chapter 2, we shall look at development of specification for goods, services, and works. Remember, in procurement or supply chain in general, you normally have to develop specifications. In simple terms, specifications are the list of requirements or characteristics that are needed for a product or service, or sometimes works. So that in the event you want a certain product in the market, normally as procurement, your main responsibility is to develop those specifications depending on the user's requirements. So that as a user, you have to ensure that you come up with specifications that will be communicated to the procurement department, who will now develop the specification. So we'll look at the different types of specifications and the characteristics of a good specification. Chapter 3 is on procurement of goods, services, and works in various sectors. So basically, we are going to look at different sectors and how you can incorporate procurement. For example, in the private sector, there's a way they do their procurement. When you look at the public sector, there's a way they do their procurement. We also have another sector which is called the third sector. Basically, we are looking at the non-governmental organizations and charity organizations and how they do their procurement. So that at the end of the day, you have an idea of what normally happens in some of these institutions. Then we shall look at procurement legal framework. And here we are trying to understand what are some of the rules and regulations when it comes to issues to do with procurement. So that at the end of the day, you will understand the legality. And when we talk about the legal framework in procurement, what comes into our mind, for example, in the Kenyan chapter, we have the Kenyan Constitution as the mother of all the laws. Then secondly, we have the Public Procurement Asset Disposal Act of 2015. And this acts as a guide so that if you are in procurement and you are a procurement practitioner, then you can use that guide to perform some of the critical procurement functions within the organization. Then within the legal framework also, we have what is called the Public Procurement Regulation of 2020. And the work of the regulation basically is a simplification of the act, so that when you're reading the regulation, you are understanding the act more. Because when you look at the act, you realize that the act is normally written in legal terms, and sometimes it becomes difficult for any layman person to interpret the act. So what normally utilizes or catalyzes that is the regulation, because it is written in a language that you can easily relate with and you can also understand. Then obviously, when you talk about the legal framework, we can look at the Public Finance Management Act of 2012. And that is why, as people in procurement, you also need to understand what happens in finance, because finance and procurement normally they work hand in hand. And at the end of it all, it becomes more seamless when it comes to issues of operations. Then we're also looking at the Public-Private Partnership Act of 2009 as one of the critical legal frameworks that support the partnership between the private sector and the public sector. So chapter 5 is all about procurement of goods and the methods that we normally use in procurement. Remember, one of the critical methods of procurement is the preferred procurement method, which normally is the open tendering method. Why open tendering? This is because, remember, when you are talking about open tendering, it gives people an opportunity. Any person who feels that he really needs to work with the government, they are normally given a chance. They are normally given a chance, and this helps in ensuring success of the objective of procurement, which is competitive, competition, fair competition. Then we also have other methods of procurement, which are normally referred to as alternative procurement methods. And one of the alternative procurement method that is very common is the direct procurement method. Why direct procurement? Sometimes you might be working in an area that is sensitive. For example, when the government is buying weapons, you don't expect the government to float that bid to the public because weapons sometimes are very sensitive. So the government might decide, because of the sensitivity of these items, we are going to buy directly from a particular vendor. But there's normally a clause when it comes to direct procurement where they're saying if the purpose of direct procurement is to avoid competition, then it is not recommended for any organization to use direct procurement. But if the purpose is for emergency issues or something that you didn't plan for and it has just come, you can use direct procurement. For example, a critical example that I like using is the example of the vaccines. Remember the vaccines for Corona? During that time, the government decided that they were going to buy directly from the users. However, we had a lot of challenges when it came to the issue of audit. And it was realized that the government really overspent and some vaccines never got into the shelves. Chapter 6 is on procurement planning. Remember, every year in procurement, you must come up with a plan. And these plans normally emanate from the user department so that the users will be able to come up with different requirements. And once they have those requirements, then it means they have to share the same requirements to the users, the procurement department, so that once the procurement have those requirements, they will be able to consolidate those requirements together so that they come up with one big procurement plan, normally referred to as the annual procurement plans, so that every department raises their requisitions or what they require and they share the same to procurement. And once procurement consolidate, then we come up with a plan that is going to assist in budget allocation. Then chapter 7 is on bidding documents. Remember, we will be able to understand various bidding documents and how they can be implemented in the organization. For example, when we talk about the tender document, the standard tender document, So we will be able to go through the tender document and be able to understand. For example, if we talk about the request for proposal document or request for quotation document, so we will be able to look at some of those documents and how they can be implemented and on what scenarios can we use different documents. Chapter 7 is on bidding documents. So you need, chapter 8 is on bidding process. So you'll be able to understand the tendering process and how you can implement the tender process more seamless. Remember, it is one of the critical areas because this process must be taken with a lot of care. Because if you bring the wrong people into your organization, then at the end of the day, you'll end up suffering as an organization. And this might not be good for the organization in terms of performance. Remember, the main objective of procurement or supply chain in general is to ensure that they cut costs in the organization. So this bidding process is very important because at the end of the day, you must sign the bid together with your suppliers. So if you sign a wrong bid, sometimes it might bring issues and it might affect your performance at large. Chapter 9 is on management of procurement contracts. Remember, we enter into contracts most of the time. In procurement, we enter into contracts. And contract management is critical because you need to be able to engage your suppliers for a very long time. So when you're writing these contracts, make sure you capture everything within the contract. And this contract will act as a guide. And it is the link between between the buyer, which is party A, and the seller, which is party B. So contract management is very important. Chapter 10 is on receiving and inspection of materials. So here we will be able to look at items when they come into the organizations, what needs to be done, what are some of the issues that we look at, and once the goods are in good condition and everything is okay, you must give an acceptance certificate that indeed you've inspected these items, they're in good condition, and the supplier has been given the acceptance. So this will go a long way to look at the process because you must understand the process. And the supplier, the acceptance is very important for the supplier because remember, suppliers normally interact with different organizations. So sometimes when they are looking at the experience of the supplier, these are some of the things that they look at. Then chapter 11 is on storage and issuance of inventory. This is normally internal, where you need to understand how do you issue materials within the user department. They need to raise requisitions. The requisitions must be approved. Once the approval is done, they must come with the requisition to the store. They get an issue, then the issuing notice generated, and the process continues like that. Chapter 12 is on emerging issues in procurement of goods, works, and services. Basically, we need to understand what is new in procurement and how best can we implement procurement. Remember, we are in an era of technology. For example, when you talk about sustainability, you realize that there has been a shift in what organizations are doing, and this shift has really transformed the organizations. And most organizations nowadays are talking about the sustainability agenda. Then another thing that is very common nowadays, and most companies are talking about it, is data protection. So that when you're in supply chain, you also need to protect data. And according to the Data Protection Act of 2019, one of the focus is to ensure that you protect personal data, data about suppliers, data about your different stakeholders is very, very critical. So data protection is also an emerging trend or issue that we need to look at. Green procurement, robotics, artificial intelligence, and things like that. So having looked at the course outline, the next thing is to introduce the topic. But before we introduce the topic, or before we introduce the chapter, any question or comment that you feel you need to hear from me. So the floor is open for a question, a comment before we can continue. So I'll start with the lady, Tabitha.
I don't have any question as at now.
Yes.
But just looking forward to understand all that you've been talking about.
Yes.
Like the course outline.
Yes.
And wondering if someone was to sit for the August exam, looking at this time frame, is it viable? Okay, maybe Yuma is revising, but me, I think I am starting from nil.
So most of the time you've heard about goods, you've heard about services, and you've heard about works. So we need to understand in details what is a good, what is a service, and what is works. So let's begin by looking at goods. So you've been interacting with goods most of the time. And basically, when we talk about goods, these are items that have physical characteristics. For example, when we talk about physical characteristics, we are looking at different characteristics like the shape of something that you want to buy. You might end up looking at the appearance, you might end up looking at the weight. A good example is when a company wants to buy, let's assume they want to buy laptops for their staffs. So when you look at a laptop, what are the physical characteristics of a laptop? You might look at the screen, you might look at the color, you might look at the brand and things like that. So when you look at all these, you can say in simple terms, okay, you can say in simple terms, anything that has physical characteristics and is tangible, you can be able to touch it and you can be able to even feel it, then we can say that is a good. And the main focus of having a good or a service is to be able to satisfy human wants and provide what is called utility. And in simple terms, when you look at utility, utility is satisfaction. So a good is any physical item that has physical characteristics and is able to provide utility or satisfaction. Types of goods. We have different types of goods that can exist in the market. For example, we have what is called consumer goods. These are final goods ready for sale that the consumer uses to satisfy current wants. For example, if today you wanted to buy water so that you can quench your thirst, you'll walk into a supermarket and you'll be able to buy the water that you feel is best for you. Once you take the water, then we can say that that water has been able to satisfy your current need, the need of being thirsty. So you walk into a supermarket and you're able to buy. Even in organizations, when they want something or a good, they will go ahead and buy that good. Either they can decide to engage a particular supplier or they can decide to go direct to the market and buy that product to satisfy a certain purpose that it was meant to satisfy. The second type of good is called the producer good. Producer goods. Producer goods, these are goods that, just a minute. These are goods used to produce other goods. Let's assume you are in the manufacturing industry and you wanted to produce sugar. The core or the raw material for sugar could be, let's say, sugarcane. But how can you produce this sugar? You need to have machines that will be able to squeeze that sugar so that it produces the pulp. And once there is that pulp, then you can use the pulp to produce sugar. So anything that has the ability to produce other goods, then we can classify those goods as producer goods. And an example there is machinery. We have plant and we have factories. Then we also have another category of goods, that is the durable goods. These are goods that are not for immediate consumption. Maybe you are buying these products so that you can consume it at a later date. So obviously we can say that that is a durable good, because your intention is to buy these products today so that in future, maybe after 1 year from now, you can use them for the purpose that you wanted to use them for. A good example is when you go to the market and you buy dried beans. So you basically want to use these beans maybe next year. So once you buy it, we can say that good is a durable good because the consumption is not immediately. Then we have what is called non-durable goods. Non-durable goods are goods that are going to be consumed immediately or are usable for a short period of time. And a critical example there is vegetable. For example, today we went into the market and you bought some vegetables. And the intention of you buying the vegetable was to consume it, maybe in the evening or tomorrow. So we can say by virtue of consuming it for a shorter period of time, then that is an undurable good. Then we also have a substitute good. A substitute good is a good that can be used in the place of another good. For example, if you go to the market today and you wanted to buy your favorite milk, that is the Brookside milk, then all of a sudden you go to Brookside or you go to a supermarket and you don't get Brookside. It will not mean that you are not going to go out of the supermarket without milk. You can decide to look for an alternative of Brookside. Maybe you can say, I'm going to buy fresher milk. So by virtue of buying fresher milk, we can say fresher milk is a substitute of Brookside milk. So substitute is consumed in the place of another. Then we have complementary goods. Complementary goods are goods that can go hand in hand so that the consumption of one good equally leads to the consumption of the other good. For example, we have product A and product B are complement goods. So that means when you are going to the market to buy product A, there's a possibility that you have to buy product B. A good example is when you are going to buy, let's say, tea leaves or milk, you might end up buying bread because milk and bread go hand in hand. Another example of complementary goods, for example, if you buy a car today, you will be forced to buy petrol. Therefore, a car and petrol complement each other. So the demand of a car increases, it means that the demand of petrol will also go up. Having talked about goods, it's always important to also talk about services. And services, in simple terms, this is an activity that one party does to another party. For example, if today you wanted to go to make your hair, you require the services of a barber. So what the barber is going to do basically is going to offer a service to you. Therefore, it means that one person is giving another person service. And remember, services normally are intangible. You cannot touch a service. The only thing you can do to a service is feel the service. And you cannot justify that you did that service. For example, what I'm doing today, I'm giving you a service. And that is why I'm giving that service as one party to you as the other party. So it's very, very important for you as an individual. We have different types of services that can exist. For example, we have consultancy services. Consultancy services, these are services that require a lot of intellectual capacity or capability. And most of the time, as a consultant, it means that you have been in a particular area for quite some time. And by virtue of being in an area or in a particular field for quite some time, then you have some level of expertise. And therefore, it means that you are a professional in that area. You can offer services as a consultant so that once you come with your experience and your skills, you can offer services that will help another department or will help another firm to experience greater performance. So those are called consultancy services. So most of the time, once you are in the field of supply chain management, after some years, you become an expert in that area. And by virtue of having that expertise, you can decide to register your own consultancy firm so that you become an individual consultant, or you can decide to work for a particular firm, maybe Kenya Institute of Supply Management, as their consultant, so that you will be giving companies some expert advice on how they can run their supply chain activities. Then another type of service is called non-consultancy services. Non-consultancy services are related to or engaging in a paid occupation. For example, these are services that do not require any form of education. A critical type of non-consultancy services might be security services, for example. So you don't need a lot of education to be a security, let's say, officer. You only need maybe a Form 4 certificate and maybe some diploma or certificate so that you can get paid at the end of the month. So that is a kind of non-consultancy services. Another one is the cleaning services that we normally have in our places of work. They normally offer what is called non-consultancy services. So basically, at the end of the month, they expect to be paid a salary. Therefore, it is a paid occupation. So having talked about services, you also need to understand what is a work or works. So when you talk about works, normally what comes into our mind is that a works is a combination of goods and services. How do we look at it? For example, let's assume you want to construct a building in Nairobi CBD. You require the services of different people or different experts. You also require some goods or services that are going to be critical in the success of that particular project. For example, look at the Nairobi Expressway. That was an example of a works because it involves goods and it also involved different contractors. So that as a contractor, your job is to execute the project successfully. And every milestone of the project, they normally come and do some audits to establish whether the contractor is doing a good job. So works can be defined as an outcome or task to be undertaken intended to serve an economic or technical function on their own. So the main focus of works is to ensure that at the end of the day, there's an economic value that you are going to get out of the works that is going to be done. I'm still use that example of the expressway. When you look at the expressway, you realize the expressway has economic value. And when you look at the revenue that is collected there, then we can say indeed the government had a vision for that particular project. Because when you look at the number of vehicles that are going using that road, then we can say that is good. Another critical example of works is the affordable housing. When you look at the affordable housing, you realize that that is a major project. And we have different combinations of works and services that the government is doing. So what are some of the types of works? Number one, we have all work associated with construction, reconstruction, demolition, repairs, or renovation of a building structure, road, or airfield. So construction works can take every form of construction or reconstruction, or you can demolish a house and start rebuilding again, or you can decide to repair an already existing house, or you can decide to get a road or an airfield. So depending on what kind of project that you want to do, it will always take the form of works. Any other civil work, such as site preparation, excavation, erection, building, installation, materials, decoration, and finished products, all those are considered part of works. Then we have a contract with contracts which include the provision of works and services with regards to work contracts. The total value of works is greater than the value of services covered by the contract. So basically, you are looking at the contract and you are looking at the value of the contract. If you get value at the end of the day, then you can say, you can decide to do the works. You also need to do what is called a cost benefit analysis before you can do any works, so that you look at the value of what you are going to get out of the project that you are going to do. And that is why the government, together with the private sector, most of the time, they enter into PPP agreements. And one of the focus of entering into these agreements is for purposes of ensuring that at the end of it all, they benefit. The government, together with the private sector, they can benefit. Types of procurement. Types of procurement. But before we jump into the types of procurement, we need to understand what is procurement in the first place. What is procurement in the first place? But before I talk about procurement, I need to give you an opportunity to ask a question so that we can move like that. So I'll start with okay, Tabitha, I will share the notes. Don't worry. I will share the notes. Don't worry.
Okay.
Don't worry. Don't panic. I'll share the notes. Any other question? We have Michael here. Michael, do we have Michael here in this class? So when you look at procurement, most of the time, they are really doing a good job of ensuring that they make goods, works, and services available. And these goods, works, and services are very critical to the operation of the organization. And when you look at successful companies and companies that have been able to implement procurement within their operation, we can easily say that procurement plays a strategic role in the success of companies. Therefore, a company that wants to be strategic, they must rethink on how they do their procurement. They must reorganize their procurement function so that procurement will act as a critical pillar in the success. Look at companies like Safaricom. When you look at Safaricom and their procurement, you realize that they are amongst best companies in implementing procurement successfully. So procurement in simple terms is the process of acquiring goods, works, and services. So that is the simple term of procurement, where your main focus is to ensure that you acquire either a good, you acquire a service, or you acquire a works. And the main focus of acquiring all these is to be able to achieve a certain purpose or a certain objective within the organization. And remember, procurement and supply chain normally are the ones who ensure that we have a smooth flow of operation in any organization, be it in manufacturing, be it in operations, marketing, and any other area. So procurement plays a very critical role. It gives a broader perspective to buying, and it most often used interchangeably with purchasing. So you can either say procurement or purchasing. So they normally go hand in hand. So procurement process or concept is a wider range of supply activities, those included in purchasing function. So there are different activities that you need to do in procurement. For example, you need to look at issues like sourcing, you need to look at issues like tendering and other activities that are critical to the procurement function. So procurement is concerned with securing goods and services that best meet the needs of the users and the local community by providing the best value to help in achieving firm's key priority. So the keyword there that you need to understand is that procurement is concerned with acquiring goods that best meet the needs of the users. Remember, when you look at procurement, they work hand in hand with the users, because once a need arises, the first initiators of any procurement, remember, are the users, because they're the ones who need something, so they have to kickstart that process. If they don't requisition, then it means the procurement process cannot really begin. So need recognition is very critical, and it emanates from the users. So once the users raise all this, then it is the work of procurement to ensure that they source from different suppliers through the sourcing process or the procurement process or any other process of ensuring that the goods come to the organization. Another thing that you need to understand in that definition is the value that they are going to bring. So once they source or they procure for those items, our main focus is the value that it is going to add to the firm. And this value must be in line with the organization's objective and priorities. So you also need to look at the priorities and the objective of that firm. So according to the Chartered Institute of Supplies, that is from the UK, they have defined procurement as the process undertaken by the organizational unit that either as a function or part of an integrated supply chain, responsible for procuring or assisting users to procure in the most efficient manner required suppliers at the right time, quality, quantity, price, management of suppliers, thereby contributing to competitive advantage of the enterprise and achieving its corporate strategy. So here we are looking at an integrated process that is undertaken by an organizational unit. And the main focus is to assist users to procure. So basically you are supporting the users in the most efficient manner. So we also need to look at issues like lead time, you need to look at quality and many other aspects in a more efficient manner. Required supplies. So you must ensure that these items are really needed. So you don't just buy for the sake of buying, you also need to do your analysis to see whether this thing is necessary and must we buy it. So you also need to ask yourself some questions. Required supplies at the right time. So you only buy at the right time, and that is why we normally apply the just-in-time philosophy, so that we don't just buy something that you don't need. You only buy what is needed. Then we're also looking at quality. Remember, quality is relative, and that is why most of the time the organization will come up with a standard that is going to be used across board, so that once they have that standard, it means that this standard will cut across the board so that they avoid issues of variety within the organization. Then another thing that is very important, quantity. And quantity is the amount that is needed. For example, if the company had ordered for 100 pieces of photocopying papers, then you need to get the 100 pieces as the quantity that was ordered. And that is why we always talk about order fulfillment. Was the supplier able to fulfill that order? It's very, very important. Then another thing that is also looking at is the price. Remember, one of the focus of procurement is to save on cost. We also need to look at the price. And mostly, not always is the case that cheap is good. Sometimes you might buy something expensive, but you're also looking at the durability of that thing. So when you talk about price, not necessarily the lowest, but the price that is going to be critical when it comes to saving. So you might buy something one off, too expensive, but it is going to serve you for a very long time. Or you might buy something that is cheap and you buy every quarter you are buying that thing. We also need to look at price in that sense. Then management of suppliers. So the work of supply chain or procurement is to manage suppliers. And suppliers, remember, are very good people. The only thing you need to do is to be able to manage them and ensure that they support your business. Make sure that you communicate your vision to them so that they can really be in a position to assist. And always ensure that your suppliers are paid on time. You engage your suppliers, maybe you can come up with conferences where you can easily interact and be in a position to talk more and do business more. Then this is going to contribute to what is called competitive advantage. So competitive advantage is where when you're looking at the others in the industry, you have an upper hand when it comes to your suppliers, when it comes to your operation. And at the end of the day, we're also looking at how you're going to achieve your corporate strategy. Remember, you need to have a corporate strategy, and the strategy is what now will catapult you into greater heights. And when you look at the industry, you will become a market leader because of the achievement, courtesy of procurement and supply chain into your corporate strategy. So you need to look at all that and how best you can implement it. So when you look at the Public Procurement Act of 2015, defines procurement as the acquisition by purchase, rental, lease, hire purchase, license, tenancy, franchise, or any other contractual means of any type of works, assets, services, or goods, including livestock or any combination, and includes advisory, planning, processing, and supply chain systems. So here we are looking at the acquisition depending on any other contractual means. And when we talk about contractual, this is where you enter into a contract with different service providers or contractors or even suppliers. So for example, when you talk about purchase, this is where you go to the market, you buy something, and that is it. Then after 20 days or 90 days or 60 days, you pay that supplier. You can decide to rent a property where at the end of every month, there's a rent that you have to pay. So the government can decide that they're going to acquire a certain property through rental. Or you can decide to lease. Lease is the same as rental, but the only difference with lease, it's a longer period of time. You can lease a property for even 10 years or even 100 years. For example, when you look at Del Monte, the land that Del Monte is on today is a leased property for 100 years. Some of our leaders will not be there the next 100 years. So hire purchase is where you buy, you pay the first installment, then the other installments you agree that we are going to pay the first installment, then the rest of the money that is remaining, you're going to pay for a certain period of time, depending on your agreement. Then we have license where you need to have a license for a particular property. We have tenancy where you can agree so that you become a tenant up to a certain period of time, then you transfer back to government. Franchise is where you can decide to use a name of an institution. Then at the end of it all, you pay what is called, you pay the premiums of the franchise, normally called royalties. You would pay royalties and any other combination. And it involves advisory. So as a procurement or supply chain professional, you must give an advice. Then you plan, you must also plan ahead. So when you are planning, you are looking at the future, using your historical data and trying to project what might happen in future. Then processing, we're also talking about processing. You need to improve your processes. And the only way you can improve your processes is by looking at the supply chain system as a whole. Remember, when you talk about supply chain, we're looking at supply chain as a system. And remember, when you look at a system, I always like using the example of the human body. The human body is a system that entails different subsystems that are put together so that these subsystems can be able to communicate and they can work in harmony. And that is why we have the human body. Look at supply chain as a system where we have different subsystems. For example, when you look at logistics, that is a different other case. When you look at commercial warehousing, that is another subsystem. When you look at procurement, on the other hand, that is another subsystem. When you look at international purchasing, imports and export, when you look at shipping, that is also another sub. So when you all put all these together, then it becomes the supply chain system. Within the system also, we have other people that support the system, like we have manufacturers on the other hand, we have the government on the other hand, we have different key players, partners that support the whole system of supply chain management. So procurement activities may include, but not limited to the following. Number one is development of material and service specifications. Remember, you must come up with a specification, and the specification normally acts as a guide that will help us to ensure we buy the right thing, depending on the requirements of the user. Then another thing or another activity is value for money analysis activity. So when you talk about value for money and analysis, this is where you now look at what you're bringing on board. Is it going to add value to the organization? Is it going to add value to the people in that organization? So you need to do your analysis so that you don't just buy. You need to do cost benefit analysis and how the product that you want to bring on board is going to add on value to the organization. Very important. Then we're also looking at market research, extensive market research. And market research is a critical part of supply chain management. So that before you engage a supplier, you need to go to the market, do your surveys, make sure you get the right suppliers, suppliers who are reliable, suppliers who are willing to support you, suppliers who can offer credit, suppliers who are capable, suppliers who have capacity, so that when they come on board, they are able to support you fully, so that it becomes a win-win for all of you. You also need to conduct all purchasing functions. You need to understand what are those purchasing functions that you need to do, and you need to perform them. Then supplier quality management. You need also to manage your suppliers. And that is why we'll normally talk about early supplier involvement, where you decide to engage your suppliers in advance so that you can at least communicate to them so that they know what your agenda is and they can easily support you on that agenda. Early supplier involvement is very important, particularly when you're dealing with products that are customized. For example, when you want to customize your product, so that when you look at your products, they maybe have a brand of your company, or maybe you want a particular design. So you need to engage your suppliers so that from the word go, they do it right the first time. Then supplier quality management. So here we are looking at, so we have talked about that. Disposal of obsolete material. So how do you dispose your materials? That is another area that is also very critical. So that before you dispose a particular item, you also need to have a committee. And the work of the committee is to come to you to look at what you need to dispose so that they can also do their analysis. There has been arguments in the organization where some employees decide to make items obsolete, even if those items are not really obsolete. So it's very important that they do their own analysis, and you can also come up with the disposal approval form that each and every member of staff who wants to dispose any item must sign that approval form to ascertain that indeed these items need to be disposed. Then material handling activities. Remember, most of the time, because of the nature of movement of items from the manufacturer, from the supplier, up to the customer or consumers, most of the time, there is a lot of material handling. And remember, you need to come up with a system that will handle these materials so that if they reach the consumer on the other end, the material will still have the quality and the quantity that was transported from the supplier. Supplier relationship is another one. You also need to build relationships with your suppliers so that at the end of it all, it becomes a win-win for all of you. Then obviously we have contract management activities where you need to manage contracts. And lastly, we have store management activities where you also need to manage some of these stores. The other thing we need to look at is purchasing. So purchasing in simple terms is the process of buying. Remember, we are talking about, yes? Yes?
I wanted to get the difference between supplier relations and supplier quality management.
Supplier quality management.
And supplier relationship.
Okay, no problem. So supplier relationship management and supplier quality. So when you look at supplier quality management, this focuses more on the product that the supplier is bringing on board. So that what the supplier is bringing must be something that is of quality, something that is able to fit the purpose. So the focus on quality is particularly on the product that the supplier is going to bring. On the other hand, supplier relationship is on the supplier himself. So you need to build a good relationship with your suppliers so that you treat your suppliers as partners rather than treating your suppliers as just people by the way. So you need to ensure that you treat your suppliers strategically so that you build that strategic relationship so that it becomes a collaborative kind of relationship that both parties are going to win. Hope I've answered your question.
So supplier quality is about product, and supplier relationship now is about the suppliers themselves.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Wally.
Okay. Michael, I've not seen those units. Okay. Okay. I think I've seen them. So purchasing is the process of buying. It involves need identification from the user, preparing the bidding documents, supplier selection, negotiation of price, follow-up, up to the time when the goods are delivered. So purchasing will ensure that you identify the need from the user. So the user must initiate the process. The user must request for those products that are needed. For example, let me just use an example. Let's assume the user requires photocopying papers. They've realized that there are no photocopying papers. So that is a need that has arose. So the user is going to fill a requisition form, either manual requisition or system generated requisition. So once they have the requisition, then the next stage is the requisition must be approved by the head of the user department or a representative, depending with who is available at that time. Then preparing a bidding document. So once the user presents the requisition, then the procurement department will prepare a bidding document. It can either be the normal bidding that you must explore the open tendering and things like that, or you can decide, because these are suppliers that are in the system, you can decide to request for quotation, so that once you prepare the request for quotation, you share the quotation to different suppliers, and the suppliers will bring the quotations. Then you can do your analysis, so that analysis will help you to choose the supplier that you are going to select. So once you do your analysis, then the next step is supplier selection. So you just choose the supplier that you feel is fair in terms of price. Then you can decide to negotiate further. Yeah, you can decide to negotiate with the supplier that you choose, and once you negotiate now, you can make an order, then do some follow-up so that you understand where the supplier is. And remember, once you do the order, the supplier must acknowledge that he or she has received the order and send an advice note. And the work of the advice note basically is to tell you that this is when we are planning to deliver the goods, so that you can also plan on your side on how you're going to deliver the goods, on how you're going to receive the goods, so that you prepare space and things like that in the store. And that is the essence of an advice note for purposes of planning on your side. Then obviously the delivery then comes last, where the supplier now delivers, and the other processes now will follow from there. So purchasing has been referred to as doing the 5 rights. And when we talk about the 5 rights, these are the objectives of purchasing. As a purchasing officer or as a procurement officer, you need to have the 5 R's of purchasing, so that at the end of the day, you look at the quality, you look at the quantity, you look at the time, and you look at the price, and lastly, you look at the right source. So the right source is the right supplier. Yes?
Clarification in terms of matters of negotiation.
Yes.
Do we do negotiations in all procurement proceedings, or is it applied to a certain procurement, maybe procurement of
I'm not getting you. Do you sauti yako kidogo? You're saying we do negotiations? Yes.
all procurement activities,
Yes.
or is it only applied to certain procurement activities, can we do negotiations for procurement of goods, services, or is it only, maybe you can see from the act that saying negotiations in maybe in non-professional services?
Yeah, you can do negotiations on all services, even goods. You can do negotiations, even in works. You can do negotiations. And before contract signing, by the way, once you select the winning bidder, you can further negotiate, so that once you sign, then the deal is sealed. So there's no harm in negotiating before signing the contract. So once you can agree with the winning bidder, you can negotiate downwards. So that if he agrees, then you agree, then you sign the contract signing, then you can now give the order to the winning bidder. So you can negotiate any goods, negotiate works, negotiate services.
Okay.
Yes. Any other
Mwalimu,
question? Yes.
this definition of purchasing and procurement, is it not the same?
The process of buying. And the procurement was acquiring. Procurement is the process of acquiring goods, works, and services. But just read here, often used
interchangeably with purchasing.
So
okay.
That is the catch there. Huh?
So they are the same.
They're using hand in hand.
Okay.
But the procurement is much broader. Because purchasing, you start with, you see purchasing, you start with need identification. Then prepare bidding documents, supplier selection, negotiation. So procurement is wider in terms of scope. Yeah, because procurement is more about strategic. It's strategic in nature because you're looking at the scope, a wider scope, and how you can engage different suppliers to come on board. Is that okay?
So if you were asked to define procurement and to define purchasing, you can use the same wording.
Yeah, you can use the same wording, but you need to be specific. You see what purchasing is saying? It involves need identification.
Okay.
So already you've entered into a contract with a particular supplier.
Oh.
But the other one you see was talking about entering into contractual. There was something about contractual here. Other contractual means.
Oh.
So it involves purchase, rental, lease, hire purchase, license, tenancy, franchise. But this other one, you already have the supplier on board. The list of approved suppliers. So once you have the list of approved suppliers, so you just go pick the suppliers, maybe for request for quotation, the minimum suppliers that you need to engage are 3.
Okay.
So that once you do your analysis, you give the best in terms of price. So already you have these suppliers on your portal. So what you just need to do is to buy.
Okay.
So you prepare the RFQ, you select the suppliers, then you negotiate the price, follow up, and delivery is done. So, but procurement is more into bringing the suppliers on board, doing the tendering process, open tender, pre-qualification, all that.
So.
Any other question, Michael? I don't have a question. So next, when we come, we shall start from, we shall understand briefly the principles of procurement. So I'll give you an assignment. Go and do research on the principles of procurement so that when we come next time, we shall discuss on that.